Welcome to episode 11 of The Crisis, a day-by-day account of Britain's 1931 crisis brought to you 90 years on. The formation of an all-party government, or as it termed itself, a cooperation of individuals of all parties, was a novelty in British politics in peacetime. The important questions facing the new administration were first, would it attract the confidence of international investors so that a loan could be secured to bolster the Bank of England? And second, although Liberal and Conservative support was surely assured, what would be the reaction of the Labour Party? The day the national government had been formed, Monday the 24th of August, had actually been the worst of the crisis so far for the Bank of England. A disastrously candid editorial in the Times that morning had revealed to the world that the bank's resources were approaching exhaustion, and so the markets had gone into a panic, with the bank suffering their heaviest losses in a single day, around £12 million. Therefore, the first days of the national government were just as panic-stricken as the last days of the Labour administration, as several weeks of work involving negotiations with over 100 American and French banks was undertaken in just a few days, so that £40 million worth of credits had been secured by the 31st of August. Nevertheless, the situation remained desperate, and a lot was resting on the balancing of the budget. The cabinet worked feverishly on a program of £70 million of cuts based on the £56 million the Labour government had put together, plus at least £80 million in tax rises, plus a part suspension of the sinking fund. However, an emergency budget would have to wait for parliamentary approval in September. MacDonald had addressed the nation in a BBC radio broadcast on the evening of the 25th of August. In general terms, he explained the financial crisis, the new government, addressed claims of a banker's conspiracy, and also set out his own position as follows. Quote, "I speak tonight under unusual and, to me, rather sorrowful circumstances. I have given my life to the building up of a political party. I was present at its birth. I was its nurse when it emerged from its infancy and it attained to adult years. At this moment, I have changed none of my beliefs and none of my ideals. I see that it is said that I have no Labour credentials for what I am doing. That is true. Be that as it may, I have credentials of even higher authority. My credentials are those of national duty as I conceive it, and I obey them irrespective of consequences." He also re-emphasized that the national government was a government of individuals rather than a formal coalition that tied parties together, that the present government would not fight a government, and that when its work was done, the political situation would return to normal, quote, "and those of us who have taken risks will receive either our punishment or our reward." Clearly, MacDonald was talking about a prospective return to the Labour ranks in the not-too-distant future. His private secretary had seen the de facto new Labour leader Arthur Henderson that day, and Henderson had said of the split, quote, "We must not take this too seriously." Henderson said that, as in the First World War, when MacDonald had resigned the party leadership to advocate a pacifist stance, when Mr. MacDonald left the party, he, Henderson, had kept it together and it was ready to receive Mr. MacDonald back again. He was parting with the PM now in no spirit of anger or resentment. However, any return for MacDonald and his allies would be dependent on the attitude of the Labour Party to the new government and its actions. In the days after the 24th of August, MacDonald wrote and talked to a number of loyal colleagues, and indeed wrote to every Labour MP in the House of Commons. But in the vast majority of cases, he failed to recruit even close followers such as Herbert Morrison and Tom Shaw. The reason even some of the most convinced of MacDonaldites failed to join the national government was the rapidly changing political atmosphere in the Labour movement. On the afternoon of the 24th, straight after the final meeting of the Labour cabinet, Arthur Henderson and his supporters had decamped to the TUC headquarters at Transport House for what his ally Hugh Dalton called, quote, "a council of war." Also present were the leading trade unionists, such as TUC General Secretary Walter Citron and MacDonald's chief opponent in the crisis talks, Ernest Bevan. They decided that the party newspaper, the Daily Herald, should take a much harsher line against MacDonald than the editor had intended. There soon came an announcement that a joint meeting of the TUC General Council and the Labour Party National Executive Committee would be held on the 26th, and the tenor of Citron's statement, in which he said that trade union consent, quote, "has not been asked for and has not been given," made it clear that the Labour movement was going to move into sharp opposition to the national government. Also on the 24th, J.H. Thomas attended a meeting of the executive of the National Union of Railwaymen, which he had been General Secretary of since 1916. The union had permitted him a leave of absence to partake in the Labor government. Now, the Labor government had left office, they demanded he return to his duties at the union, despite him explaining his reasons for joining the national government. It was clear the executive were asking him to choose between the union he had helped found and remaining in the cabinet, and, in effect, they were cutting Thomas loose for joining with MacDonald. If even the beloved Jimmy Thomas, railwayman's hero, could not hope to retain the support of his old union, it was clear that, for labor men, joining the national government would mean total severance with one's supporters and the end of one's career for the sake of a 6-week emergency administration. Thus, the failure of many of the men MacDonald appealed to join him can be well understood. Despite this, the first indications of labor opinion in the form of the Daily Herald editorial of the 25th of August attempted to straddle both total opposition to the national government and condemnation of the, quote, dictatorship of international finance, as well as wishing no personal animosity against MacDonald and his supporters. The paper writing, quote, "The labor movement as a whole is big enough and generous enough to salute their sincerity. The Daily Herald will decline to countenance any personal attacks upon them, but it will answer their case with reason and argument." This position of attacking the government but respecting MacDonald and others would unsurprisingly be impossible to sustain, but it does highlight the initial pain that all in the labor movement felt about the split with MacDonald, Snowden, and Thomas. Indeed, the vast majority on both sides of the divide, even Henderson, believed that as the government was a temporary solution, so the split would be temporary, and the MacDonald and Company would rejoin their ranks in time. The public reaction to the creation of the national government is difficult to gauge in an age before opinion polling. However, there is anecdotal evidence of labor supporters who held MacDonald as a hero, turning portraits of the labor leader against the wall after his apparent betrayal. On the other hand, all national newspapers, bar the aforementioned Daily Herald, were fulsome in their praise for the new government, and MacDonald's radio address was well received. It is an oft-expressed sentiment that the public would prefer politicians to work together rather than argue, especially in times of crisis, and the extraordinary novelty of the leaders of the three main parties coming together for the national good was certainly popular with the public as a whole. The ultimate litmus test of public opinion, a general election, would decide once and for all how the British people felt about MacDonald's decision and this new form of government. On Wednesday, the 26th of August, the meeting of the TUC General Council, the Labour Party Executive, and the Consultative Committee of the Parliamentary Labour Party took place, and it was unanimously decided to oppose the new government. The Labour Party would thus be the official opposition to the supposedly all-party national government. Those ministers present who had voted for the cut in the dole in the final 11-9 split in the Labour cabinet were fiercely condemned. On the next day, the three bodies published a joint manifesto that called for full opposition to the government, decried the crisis as a banker's ramp, an artificial crisis created by bankers and financial vested interests to drive a working-class labor government from office, and essentially adopted the TUC's economic program that had been presented on the 20th, most pertinently rejecting all cuts in public spending. On Friday, the 28th of August, all three parties held special meetings. Liberal MPs, peers, and candidates met at 11 a.m. Given the fractured state of the party, what was remarkable was the unity on show. The Liberal Party was firmly behind the national government. Although the rebel Sir John Simon was absent, he sent a message which congratulated all those Liberals who had joined the government. In his speech to the meeting, acting leader Herbert Samuel gave the first hint that the national government may last more than a few weeks, saying that it should last until its task was well on the way to completion. Clearly, the Liberals were not keen on leaving office anytime soon. At 11:30 a.m., Conservative MPs, peers, and candidates met. Baldwin explained to the party why he had joined the government and the conditions in the memorandum of the 24th of August. He knew many in the party would be anxious about their desire for tariffs being shelved once again, and he himself, like many of his colleagues, was wary about coalitions. And the Tories had looked odds-on to win a landslide election victory in the near future, an opportunity which might be denied to them now. Furthermore, the die-hard wing of his party had been excluded from office, and many, such as Winston Churchill and Leo Amory, might be resentful about their remaining on the backbenches. Baldwin, therefore, was more cautious than Samuel, telling his colleagues, quote, "Now I know as well as anybody here the difficulties and dangers of any form of combination, especially when there is a big matter of principle dividing us. In this matter of balancing the budget, we are all agreed in the government. After that, our agreement ends and we part company." We then get to point 2, the tariff, which we know is absolutely essential to complete the work which is being begun by the rectification of the budgetary finance. When this parliament dissolves, when the economies are carried and the budget is balanced, you will then have a straight fight on tariffs against the Socialist Party. The meeting unanimously supported Baldwin's decision to join the national government, but the conservative leader had already made it clear he wanted an election, and he wanted tariffs. He did not see the government's life being a long one. At 2 p.m. on the 28th, the MPs and peers of the Parliamentary Labour Party gathered for a 3-hour meeting, in which the party executive committee and the general council of the TUC were also present, a new development suggested by Henderson to promote unity, and surely also apply subtle pressure to wavering MPs. Representing the Labour members in the national government were Ramsay MacDonald's son Malcolm and the Lord Chancellor Lord Sankey, who of course had a seat in the new 10-man cabinet. MacDonald, Snowden, and Thomas, the 3 leading Labour figures who had joined the new coalition, did not attend. MacDonald sent a letter apologizing for his absence, explaining that he had only received the invitation the day before, and he had already made arrangements to go up to Lossiemouth that Friday. Could the Prime Minister not have cancelled his plans for a mini-break and attended this crucial meeting of his own party? He was in a state of nervous exhaustion, and with many trials still to come, a weekend's break was certainly most welcome for his crumbling mental health. However, MacDonald's biographer David Marquand believes that with the party in a state of confusion and emotionally torn, MacDonald's persuasive presence could have swung more MPs to his banner, but it seems the Prime Minister could not face the potential hostile reception he would receive from his own colleagues. Despite the fact that MacDonald was deeply distressed by how little Labour support he received, his attempts to rally the party to his cause were fitful and abortive. In his defense, it must be said that by the time the national government was formed in late August, there is no doubt he was physically and mentally exhausted by the ordeal the crisis had put him through. He simply lacked the energy and desire to go to war with the new party leadership and attempt to split the party more decisively. At the meeting, Arthur Henderson gave a narrative of the events of the last fortnight that was apparently, quote, studiously colorless and fair. Then came Lord Sankey, explaining his and his colleagues' reasons for joining the national government. All sources agree Sankey and Malcolm MacDonald were given a fair hearing. As well as the usual financial arguments, Sankey emphasized the Indian Round Table conference he was about to chair, and he also insisted that, of the ministers who had joined the coalition, quote, that were none of them leaving the Labour Party, nothing would ever drive him out. Sankey also said that he believed MacDonald had saved the country and Henderson had saved the soul of the Labour Party. Many others also spoke in the lengthy meeting, although only Malcolm MacDonald supported Sankey and his father's position. At one point, Malcolm made reference to the report of the Cabinet Economy Committee of 5, which brought Henderson to his feet, objecting that the Economy Committee had never made any report, only tentative proposals for the Cabinet to consider. A resolution was approved with only 7 dissenting votes to adopt the joint TUC Labour Manifesto issued on the 27th of August. Thus, the Labour Party committed itself to outright opposition to the national government and all cuts. Arthur Henderson had, according to Hugh Dalton, been initially very unwilling to become leader on the 24th of August, but, quote, in the next few days he gradually yields to pressure from all sides, and at this meeting he was elected chairman of the Parliamentary Labour Party, party leader. Clines was reconfirmed as deputy leader, and Willie Graham was elected co-deputy. While the Conservative and Liberal parties appeared remarkably united at the end of August, the Labour Party was thus split between its most famous leaders, MacDonald, Snowden, and Thomas, who, with a handful of others, had joined the national government, and the rest of the party who had committed themselves to opposition. Willie Graham summed up the position of the new Labour leadership, who believed that in leaving office, the unity of the movement had been saved and electoral advantage would accrue from opposing the cuts. Quote, the next election will be fought not by a Labour government on an admittedly difficult defensive, but by a Labour movement, united and eager. At one stroke, and with ample time to prepare for an election on unusually favourable ground, Labour Party members have been relieved of their anxieties. Yesterday, they dreaded a contest. Today, they are almost within sight of their clear majority in the House of Commons. While the Labour Party felt bullish in late August that leaving office had left them with all the cards and that by opposing painful cuts they would attract enormous public support, the coming election would prove that Henderson, Graham, and the rest had made a gigantic miscalculation. Join us in September for the next episode that will see Parliament reconvene. Old Labour colleagues go head-to-head in the passing of an emergency budget to balance the books. Thanks so much for watching episode 11 of The Crisis. If you enjoyed it, then consider dropping a like because it really helps us out. And if you're not already, then consider subscribing to never miss another episode. As well as that, we'd like to thank our patrons, including our executive producers, Eustace Abel, Jeremy Marcoux, Tom McCool, and Tony Chirin, for helping to support the show. Thanks so much, and see you in the next episode.